Let's see. All right, today's daf, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Chof Beis in Zbachim for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael Sun Basar V'Shivya. Says the Gemara at the two dots, almost halfway down on the page. Amar Shlokish, Kol HaMashlim Me Mikvah. Anything that completes a mikvah, in other words, water that's valid to be used in the mikvah, Mashlim Mekir could also be for the kiyur. We're going to discuss the Mekir that we discussed yesterday. What did we say? That the kiyur was the laver or the basin, whatever you want to call that, a big container that had the water in it that they sanctified. That was sanctified. Number one, it was considered a kli shares, which was anointed, as we saw, it was anointed, and therefore it had the kedusha of a kli shares, and they washed their hands and feet from there. Now, was that water like mikvah water? Now, mikvah water, understand something. A mikvah has got to have natural water in it, like rainwater or a lake or something like that. It's got to be natural water. It can't be what's called mayim she'uven. Mayim she'uven means if it passed through a kli, for example, a faucet. So if you take tap water from the tap, that's mayim she'uven. You can't make a mikvah with mayim she'uven. If a mikvah had, if you didn't have to have the 40 saw, the requisite amount for a mikvah, and you had it was almost full, and you had less than three, what's the word? Less than 3 saw, is it saw? It escapes me right now. Huh? A 3 log, shlosha logan of mayim she'uven, then it's okay. That doesn't passel it. Okay. But now, what kind of water was in the mei kiyur? The kiyur, was that spring water, mayim chayim, or was it like rainwater, water which is kosher for a mikvah? You can be tovel also in a spring, right? In a spring, you can be tovel also. But that's a spring. You could be tovel that way. You could also be tovel in a mikvah. There's certain things that you need a spring for when it comes to zav and stuff like that. But basically, you could be tovel in a spring or in a mikvah. Now, here in mikvahs, the Gemara says over there, anything that completes the mikvah can complete the mei kiyur also. Now, Rashi points out right even where we are in Rashi, a little bit below there, kol hamashlim mikvah, there are certain things which complete a mikvah. In other words, even if you don't have 40 saw of, let's say, rainwater or lake water, and you complete it with less than 3 log of mayim she'uven, okay, then it's okay. But if you had more than 3 log, that would passel it. There are certain things which are maslin, and they don't passel it if you don't have 40 saw yet. Mal mashlim and malin mashlim. And what does that mean? La'arbam saw. For example, let's say you have snow. You took snow. Snow is one of the things, or hail. You can make a mikvah with snow. That's valid. In other words, they can complete a mikvah and don't passel. The other things which complete a mikvah, if you less than 3 log of mayim shoven, but if you put in 3 log, that would passel it. In other words, they would passel it. So he gives it different examples there. Like what about let's say fruit juice or wine that passels the mikvah if you don't have 40 saw. Once you have 40 saw, you can throw whatever you want in there. You can throw whatever you want. You can add all you want, anything, because it's kosher already. Okay, we'll talk more about this. So he says, kol hamashlim, anything which complete a mikvah is also good for the mei kiyur. We said, how much does mei kiyur have to have? Enough at least for 4 people, right? L'revius ein hamashlim, but for revius of water, but for netilas yadayim, that's a mashlim. Revius is a very small amount, like a cup, like a little cup of water, what we make kiddush on, let's say, or it's called a revius. So that it's small, that you can't use it for that. In other words, it can't be mashlim for that. The things that are puzzle for a mikvah, or puzzle for if you need to wash your hands with the revius of water, you can't use wine, you can't use fruit juice, it's got to be water. Okay. What does it come to exclude? What things can you not use it for? When you say if it's mashlim for a mikvah, it's mashlim for a mei kiyur. And we'll see this is the idea that the mei kiyur is made from regular water, meaning like rainwater. It doesn't need spring water, what's called mayim chayim. So lemute, what does it come to exclude? Ilem lemute hanarok is really should be the right spelling there. If it's coming to exclude like liquefied clay, can you use liquefied clay in a mikvah? You know what? Depends. If a cow would bow down and drink it, cows drink stuff which isn't as clean as the stuff that we drink. If a cow would come down and drink some muddy water, like clay, liquid clay, it's kosher. That's water. that has a loch like water. Water isn't just, what's purified, what's purified water, distilled water. Water is water, however it's defined. It could be salt water from the ocean. It could be filthy water, but water's water. But if a cow wouldn't drink from it, animals know what's water, what's not water. If he wouldn't drink from it, I feel a mikveh nami in a mashma. It's not good for mikveh either. You have to have natural water. El lemute, you have choshen. Maybe it's coming to exclude like reddish insects, gnats, or something that you can't use that. You use that for a mikveh. You have like squeezed up insects. I feel be nine nami. You know what? That's kosher for a mikveh. Why? The time of Shimon Galil Omer, kol shetchilas briyas man, anything that grows naturally in the water. It grows in the water. It doesn't go, like fish. Fish are made in the water, right? It's not like they come on land and then they go into the water, right? There's millions of various kinds of creatures which
survive in the water.
Not only survive in the water, but they grow in the water. They're born in the water, right? They're created in the water. This is kol shetchilas briyas man. If it grows in the water, meaning it's born or it's created in the water, matbilma, you can be tovel in it, anything. That means, but it's got to be a liquid, obviously. But Omar of Yitzchak Bar Abdi, look at this. Matbilim be'eno shadag. If you had a big fish and its eye was liquefied, or maybe it's liquefied anyway, and if you had enough of it, or a lot of those kinds of fish, you could be tovel in that. That's considered a water. So what is it excluding? What do you say? Oh, if anything that's kosher for the mikveh is kosher for kior, for the kior in the base of Mikdash, but not for the reis. What do we come to exclude? Amar Papa Lemute, to exclude this. I'll tell you to exclude this. What is it not good for the revius? In other words, these things which are like filthy, what we would call filthy, like liquefied clay or a fish eye, it's water. You could be told that too. Should be able to be good for revius also. It says, I'll tell you, Lemute nasan saw v'natal saw. That's where I got mixed up with the saw. If you put a saw and took away a saw, what do we mean that? That's not. Listen to this. Mikvah sheish bo mem saw. I said this before. Let's say you have a mikvah that has 40 saw. Once it's 40 saw, you could add all you want. But let's say a mechuvanos, exact 40 saw. Now you put in something which is pasal. Give me. So a saw is a measure, right? Saw is a measure. So you put in, after you had 40 saw kosher, you put in something which was no good, pasal. What's that? Let's say fruit juice or a wine or something, right? Fruit juice one. Now, if you added onto it, no problem. Right? You added another saw of that. If you didn't have 40 saw and you had 39 saw and you added and you put in fruit juice, that wouldn't be good. But once you have 40 saw, it's okay. Now, let's say you added you had 40 saw, kosher, and you put in a saw of something which was disqualified, like fruit juice. And after you mixed it up, after you put it in, you took out a saw of the water from the mikveh. Now, when you took out a saw from the mikveh, do you think you got exactly that saw of fruit juice? Of course not, right? It all got mixed up. So now you really have less than 40 saw of kosher water, right? But it's okay because once you had 40 saw that was kosher and you got mixed up in there, you threw in some non-kosher, let's say, liquid like fruit juice, even if you threw in 10 saw, and then you took out 10 saw from there, even though there's a lot of fruit juice in there, it's okay. That's the rule. Nasan saw. Again, you had to mix that at exactly 40 saw, and you added a saw of non-kosher, of disqualified liquid. But not saying you took away a razor kosher. It's kosher. Okay. All right. So what do we mean by that? How much can you do with that? Till most of it, meaning up until 20 saw. A mikveh is 40 saw, right? It's kosher 40 saw. Now you have a kosher mikveh. So you could put in 20 saw more of non-kosher liquid, like fruit juice. So you have like 60 saw now, and then take out 20 saw from there. So what you're left with is 40 saw, but it's not all really good water. You're allowed to do that because once it's kosher, it's kosher. Can't do more than that. You can't say, it's 40 saw, I'll put in 30 saw of, or more than 20, let's say 21, 22 saw of bad stuff, and then take out 21. That you can't do. So what does he consume? So that you're allowed to do with a mikveh. But you can't do that with a revius, with a cup. You need a cup to wash your hands with. You can't take a cup of kosher water, whatever that water is. It could be dirty, but it's water, and put in fruit juice and, in front of fruit juice and take out a like amount. You can't, it's a very small amount. Can't do it with that. Okay, that's what he comes to exclude. Okay, so here we're talking about a key. It's brought down because we're talking about a key. It's kosher from a key. But, okay, now, And he goes on even more before we get to the real issue over here. Because what's this doing over here? It's doing over here because we said anything that's kosher for the mikvah is kosher for the makir also. Amra Papa, about 10 lines from the bottom of the page. Amra Papa. Im karach bo revius, let's say you have a kosher mikvah and you bore out, you cut out a little hole in the side of the mikvah and enough for a revius of water, a small amount to come out. Matbil b'machtam mitzvos. You can tovel in there needles and hooks. So even though they're not really in a mikvah, you could be tovel. In other words, normally you have to be tovel something. You have to be tovel in a regular mikvah, even kalim. But he says, if you had a mikvah and you took water out of there to the tune of a revius of water, you can be tovel. There's small items like needles and hooks. Oh, machshir the mikvah. Amar Shlakish. May mikvah sheirim lemei kior. Right. What did you just say? You said Rav Yirmiyah said, we started this by saying Rish Lakish said, Kol mashlam mikvah, mashlam kior. Rav Yirmiyah, Rish Lakish, that's what Rish Lakish said really before, may mikvah kshem lemei kior. May mikvah, which is like rainwater, natural water, not a spring water, but it's natural water. Can't be mayim shuv, and it can't have gone through a vessel, a kli of some sort. It's kosher mekir. Lameimra, the low mayim chaim ninu. It's mashma, you don't need mayim chaim. Mayim chaim is not that brand of kosher soda or cola in Brooklyn. They had a brand, I don't know if they're still around. Mayim chaim. It was terrible. It had a terrible taste. Horrible. They called it mayim chaim. Right. So the lo mayim you don't need spring water. Mayim chaim means a natural spring water. Water's coming out of the ground. You don't need that. But Tanya, we learn, in other words, he's saying, Rish Lakish is saying that for the kior, you don't need natural water. You don't need spring water. Any water that's good for the mikvah is good for that. Is that really true? But Tanya, we learn, it says b'mayim, when it comes to you have to wash the innards and the feet, etc., of the animal after you shechted it by a carbon. B'mayim v'lo b'yayin, it's got to be washed with water, not with wine. B'mayim v'lo b'mosik, can't have mixed wine, not just undiluted wine, even diluted wine. B'mayim v'rabel shamayim, any water is okay. V'kal v'chomer l'meikior. Now, if any water is okay, and a kal v'chomer for meikir. Now, why is it a kal v'chomer? Why is it a kal v'chomer if the meikir is also regular rainwater, right? My kal v'chomer l'meikir lav the mayim chaim nenu. In other words, if regular water is kosher, certainly spring water should be okay. Slow. It doesn't mean that the kior has spring water. Doesn't mean that. Just means the kodesh. Means kal v'chomer that my kior, because the water in the kior has been sanctified, because the kior has been sanctified. Any water there is sanctified. It means that you can use any water to wash the innards and the feet of the animal. And not only any water, but and certainly you could use water from the kior. Not that the water from the kior is spring water, but rather it's been sanctified. So what do you mean if it's been sanctified? That's an advantage? Just the opposite. It could be a disadvantage. Why? But the Gear says, in the school of Shmuel, they learned Shmuel was not a Rebbe. Even if this is Shmuel from Nardoa, the famous Shmuel, he was never called Rebbe. Then they didn't have smicha in Bavel. In any case, Tana Debei Shmuel, mine she'ein lem shem levai. It's got to be water that doesn't have a proper name. In other words, it's got to be plain water, not water that has a certain name to it, a proper name. Yatsu Meikir, excluding Meikir, Sheish Lam Shem Levai. It's not called water; it's called Meikir. So what do you see? That if it's the kir, it's a disadvantage. Elalav, it's all right. So it doesn't mean that it's Meikir. That can't mean. In other words, we're saying it doesn't mean that the Meikir is Kal V'chomer because it's spring water. Doesn't mean that, right? It could just mean that it's the sanctified. But if it's sanctified, it's worse. Elalav, the Ru'uyim Meikir means this. It's fit for kior. Why is it fit for kior? In other words, we're saying regular water is good, and kal v'chomer, water that's fit for the kior. If it's in the kior already, it's called meikir. We want regular water. It says, but you know what? So what's the kal v'chomer? That it's fit to put in the kior. Why is this water more fit than regular water? Because it's spring water. Al mayim chaim. So you see, it's mayim chaim. It's spring water, which is against what Rish Lakish said. Rish Lakish said water for the mikveh could be used for the kior. And here it's mashma that it says Bamayim and Kal V'chomer for Meikir. Can't be Meikir itself because Meikir has a name to it. It's called Kior water. It must be water that's fit for the Kior. So what's the Kal V'chomer? Because it's spring water, which is better. The answer is Machlokas. Tanoi, Dam Rabbi Yochanan Meikir What's the rule? Rabbi Shmuel Omer, Mei Mayim. It has to come from a spring. It's natural water, like Mayim Chayim. V'cham Omrim, Shar Mei Masein. That means any other water. It's just like any Shar Mei. It's like any other water. So that's the machlokas here. So back to our issue that we discussed yesterday of the kior, Moshe, the kior that you put the water in, right? The water in. We said that it's got to be. We had a different sheet. When do you have to put it to bed at night, sink it into the ground? What do you mean in the ground? Not just in the ground. It means there was a big bore underwater, under the ground, a big pool of water. They sunk it in there so that it shouldn't be possibilina, because if it stayed overnight, let's say pouring to everybody, if it stayed overnight until daybreak, that water is no good. If it stayed upset, just like a carbon is no good the next day, the same thing. Or if a person washed his hands, according to Rebbe, the Kiddush line, you have to wash again the next day once daybreak hit. So you have to put it on down. So where do you put it down? You put it in what's called the Bor HaGola. What the Bor HaGola? The people from the Gola built it, whatever it was. But the question is, what is that? Is that a mine? Is that a spring down there? And you're putting that water. If you hold that they make your spring water, so where it had to be down underneath, where you had to bury it at night before daybreak, also had to be spring water. Otherwise, it's no good. The whole idea is that you put it back in its natural habitat, so to speak, before. If you hold that the water of the kior is regular rainwater or natural water like lake water, then it could just be a big pool of water, but it stays in there and it doesn't become puzzle overnight. Otherwise, it becomes, what happens if you didn't put it down? If you didn't we had then made that wheel pulley system to lower it down and pick it up. Let's say you didn't, so you have to throw out that water and use fresh water the next day. In other words, once it's sanctified, it's only good for that day unless you do something to keep it sanctified, which is putting it in a bigger pool of water. Where you go? So if a lot of it came from the Gihon, but the question over here is this water. That's exactly the discussion over here. Was it a spring water, which means there was a spring running underneath it could be that was the Gihon that was there. Was it a spring? Was it a spring water? If it was a spring water, then the water that they would have to lower it into at night so that it shouldn't become possibilina would also be the spring water. There was a spring there. If you hold that the make here was just regular water that's kosher for a mikvah, then it could have just been a regular big pool of water. Just a big pool of water, like a big mikvah. All right, so the Mishnah said, now we're up to the next case. The Mishnah said various people who cannot do the avodah of the base mikdash. Specifically, we're talking about from Kabbalah on. Kabbalah, Allah Rika, not the Shechita. Shechita we know even a Zar could do. So we said, Zar, which Kohen cannot, a Zar can't do Kabbalah, a non-Kohen. Or if he's a Kohen and he's an Onen, he's at Tvul Yom, Mechos Kippur, Mechos Begadim, Shlochos Yadayim Reglaim, and an Aro. An Aro means an uncircumcised person. So he can't do the avodah. Why would he be uncircumcised if he was a Kohen? Because his brothers were hemophiliacs and they died. So after the bris, so they didn't do a bris anymore on this guy. I guess today they probably have ways around that, medicine or whatever they do, so that the guy he won't be a bleeder. Okay, Aro. But now, how do we know that an Aro cannot do the avodah? Guy could be a Kohen, could be a Talmid Chacham, a good guy, except his two brothers died after they had a bris milah. Not his fault, right? So he didn't do anything wrong. He's not a mamzer or anything like that. He's a kosher Jew.
Didn't do anything wrong either.
No, didn't do anything wrong either, right? Somebody did something wrong, though. Somebody did something wrong. Not him. Somebody did something wrong, right? But okay, but over here, the oral, what's wrong? How do we know that an oral who does the avodah, in other words, he can't do it ruins the avodah? Torah Moshe in the 5 books of the Bible, Torah Moshe, it didn't say there that oral can't do the avodah. It doesn't say that. From the famous Navi Yecheskel, we did learn what's the rule about an oral. Pasuk says there, Kol Panechar Oralev, if he is a son of strangers, and Oralev, his heart is uncircumcised for oral basar, or he's physically uncircumcised. Lo Yavam should not come into my base. Let's just say me. Okay, so you have a pasuk there. It says, we'll see in a minute. Why is it called Ben Nechar Oralev or oral basar? That either is what is an Oralev? An Oralev means that he's not a good Jew anymore, like he's an apostate. Okay, and we see why he's called a Ben Nechar. The oral basar, or if he's literally uncircumcised, should not do the avodah. How do we know that it profanes the avodah, ruins the avodah, disqualifies it? When you bring the sons of the strangers, orleilev, the people who are apostates, their heart has gone away from God. They're uncircumcised in their heart for Orel Basar and physical. In other words, you have a spiritual Orel and a physical Orel. Lios b'mikdashi l'chalo es beisi, to profane my house. So you see here that that if he does an Orel Basar, if he is a person, if he's an apostate, he can't do the avoda. Or if he's literally physically he's uncircumcised, he can't do the avoda. Tanarabanan. Ben Nechar, Pasuk says, if he is the son of strangers, what do I mean? Yochel Ben Nechar, I think he's a guy. Ben Nechar, what do we call it? A Nachri. Nachri is a guy. So I might think we're talking about a guy, can't do the avoda. Tamalomer or a lave. He's an oral in his heart. And Kematamalomer Ben Nechar, that's why I say Ben Nechar. Shenesraku Masav Lavidim Sheshmaim. He's like explaining what is Ben Nechar, that his actions have become alien to God. That's what he means Ben Nechar. He said Ben Nechar, who is an oral lave, like an apostate. Ainly oral lave. Oral basar. How do I know? Tamalamet says oral basar, but Yecheskel said both. Called Ben Nechar, oral lave, oral basar. So why do you have to tell me both? Just say if he's uncircumcised anyway, physically or spiritually, he would be puzzled to do the avodah. It would ruin the avodah. The ikas rachmana oral basar. If we don't say oral basar mishum demois, because that's considered repulsive. If a person is for Jewish people to be uncircumcised is considered repulsive. Aval oral lave delomos, he looks fine. He's circumcised. He's just spiritually he's gone astray. Aval oral lave delomos, say Milam, I think he's not puzzled. Maybe you think that he'll do tshuva or whatever. He asked me in oral lave, tell me oral lave because his heart is not in it. His heart is not dedicated to God. Aval oral basar delibo shemaim. He's a good Jew, like we said. He could be a perfect Jew. He just has a physical problem. He can't get a bris because he'll die, right? Aval oral basar delibo shemaim a malo. I think he wouldn't be excluded. Kamash malon that they're both excluded. Both the oral basar and the oral lave are both excluded from doing the avoda. Now we come to the next psul in the Mishnah. And this is really alluded to before because we said if he's a Tful Yom is a person who was Tameh, went to the mikveh just has to wait for sundown. Now we said, so we had here, Zar, Onein, Tful Yom, or Tameh, if he's Tameh. Now, how could a person be Tameh? A person could become Tameh by many reasons. He could be Tameh by something that emanates from his body, like a Zav or Matzorah, where he has to be Tameh for a long time till he finishes, till he gets purified physically, till he becomes better. Or the simple cases are when he gets tameh, when he gets defiled from an outside source. If the outside source is an animal, or let's say a dead animal, or a sheretz, a dead reptile, then he's tameh for one day, goes to the mikveh, and at sundown he's okay. If he is tameh mace, he's tameh for 7 days, and he's got to be sprinkled with the mei paraduma on the 3rd and the 7th day, goes to the mikveh on the 7th day. And that's it. And then after sundown, he's purified. Now, what's the rule? Let's understand something. What's the rule about a person who's tameh? Let's say he's tameh zav, and it's erev Pesach, but he's tameh from a sheretz.
Yeah.
It means he can go to the mikveh that day, and he's okay at night. He can eat the korban Pesach at night. Can he eat the korban Pesach? Is he okay? Can you shech the korban Pesach? Can't come into the Beis Hamikdash yet because he's still full yom, but he can eat that night. So that's going to be a shaila. That's a machlokas. Can he send in his korban Pesach because he can eat it at night or not? Okay, that's one thing. But we're saying here, the Mishnah is saying that a Kohen who is tameh cannot do the avoda. If he does the avoda, it's puzzle. What about if he's doing the avoda for the tzibur? He's doing a korban. He's bringing the korban. It's his turn to do the korban tamid, let's say, or the musaf or whatever. It's a korban sibur. Can he bring that? Yeah. You asked that the other day, Michael. Here Rashi tells you right away that Rashi says that that if a person's tameh, ben shet sibur tameh, or whether the Kohen's tameh or whether the tzibur is tameh, tumah hutra b'tzibur, because it's learned out the kirkas ma'ad as a karbano, the moado, bring it in its time. In other words, a korban sibur has to be brought on time. If it's a daily tamid or it's a musaf, tomorrow Mitzvah Hashem will bring a korban musaf for sukkahs. It's got to be brought in its time. Even if the kohanim are tameh, even if the tzibur is tameh, you bring the korban. Okay, so now that's right. But for yachid, the pashup shot is if you're not bringing it for a tzibur, a kohen can't do the service. He can't officiate at the korban of an individual if the individual is tameh. Or if the Kohen's tameh, right? You can't do that Here we're talking about specifically the Kohen's Tameh. Even if the person is not Tameh, the person wants to bring a carbon, and the only Kohen available is Tameh, he can't bring the carbon. That's the Pashup shot over here. So now the Gemara is going to bring down what seems like a strange sheet. The Tameh Puzzle, Amru Ziknei Darum, the elders of the Darum of the south said something. Now I looked up who are the Ziknei Darum. I'm sure there's listed somewhere who they are. I don't know offhand. So I thought it's in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, Yudzayin and Beis that lists of, who are these people? Chachmei Pumpadisa are these two guys. Chachmei Bnei Gola, these two guys. Listen all the way, Karna and this guy, these list them all. And I looked at it in ChatGPT also, who are the Ziknei Darum, and it says it's in the Gemara and Sanhedrin, Yudzayin and Beis. It's not there.
It's not there.
It's not there. And then he says it's also in Yud Ches Malach. It's not there. And there's a lot of things that they're there, and he quotes it as if, this is like a definite thing, Like there's a lot of stuff when you look up stuff, you can use ChatGPT or these other AI, sources, but a lot of it's not right. It's got to be checked out, I don't know.
Some of these articles by ChatGPT is at the bottom of the article. It says checked by such and such the person. In other words, they check for the
They did fact checking. Right, what they call fact checking, right? If it's they wrote it by ChatGPT, but he checked it. I'm telling you, you got to check this stuff too. And as it says it like, looking yesterday, he says, for example, like the Yam Shel Shlomo. Avram was asking yesterday, the Yam Shel Shlomo, how did they sink that in? Probably didn't. It was too big, so it was puzzle. So he used new water the next day. He says on ChatGPT that the Yam Shel Shlomo was in the first base of Mikdash. Second, make sure he used the Kior. Okay, whatever. I'm just saying, but here we have machlokes in the Gemara. Was it spring water or was it regular rainwater? Rainwater. Okay. Anyway, the Ziknei Darum say it's a very strange thing. The Mishnah said that if you're a Kohen and you're tummy, you can't serve. You can't serve. Now we know if you're a Kohen and you're doing a carbon sibor, even if you're tummy, you could do that. That we know Pasuk, right? It says that if it's a carbon sibor, if it's sibor's tummy or if the Kohen's tummy, you could do the avoda. Okay, but now apparently, if you're doing the avoda for an individual, you can't do if you're tummy, you can't do it. Amr Ziknei Darum, lo shanel tummy sheretz. That's only if you're only tummy sheretz. You were defiled by a dead reptile. Okay, aval tummy mace. But if you were a tummy mace, you were tummy mace. Listen to this. Mitoch shemaratza b'tzibur. Since a tummy mace, what's the rule about carbon pesach? An individual who's tamei brings Pesach Sheni. He doesn't bring it Pesach Rishon. But if the whole tzibur or rove of the tzibur is tamei, they bring it on Pesach Rishon. They're not nidcha. So he says, the Ziknei Darum says this: tamei sheretz. If a Kohen's tamei sheretz, he can't do the avoda. Right? If he's a tamei mace, he went to a funeral. Since he could do the avoda for the tzibur, maratzon nami biyachid. B'diavad he could do it for a yachid also. Wow. You understand this? If he's a tamei sheretz, he can't do the avoda for an individual. He can't officiate in the base of Mikdash. But if he's a tamei mace, since he could be maratza b'tzibur, maratza nami yachid. Rashi says, take a look at Rashi at the beginning of the narrow lines. Maratza b'tzibur lechatchila is allowed to. Maratza b'yachid b'yeved. Why are they sure? Sits maratza love because the sits of the Kohen Gadol that he wears on his head, maratza works for it. So he says b'yeved. Doesn't mean lechatchila. Right, but if he's tamei sheretz, even b'diavad he can't serve. But if he's a tamei mace, since it's maratza b'tzibur lechatchila, since it's maratza b'yachid, which is a big chiddush. Pashup shot, we don't hold. Only the Ziknei Darum hold that. We hold Kohen's tamei is tamei. Kohen's tamei can't serve unless it's a carbon sibor. Right, says the Gemara Yachi tamei sheretz nami. If you say that a person, listen to this, what would you think is more stringent, based on what I just told you? A person who's tamei mace or tamei sheretz? Tamei mace has to be tamei for 7 days. Got to get sprinkled the third and seventh day. Tamei mace is more stringent. So yachi tamei sheretz nami lazy. So he should be able to bring, if the Kohen's tamei sheretz, he'll also be able to serve an individual carbon. Kal v'chomer mi tamei mace. Ma tamei mace. Ma tamei mace shetana zah shishvir. Tamei mace needs sprinkling on the third and seventh day. Maratza, and he could do service. You're saying b'diavad tamei sheretz she'ain tana zah v'gil and it didn't shmaratza. The answer is Ksavri Divrei Darum. They hold like this: Machaprin kemiskaprin. Listen to this: the person who does the kapara, meaning the Kohen, is like the person who is receiving the atonement. Ma miskaprin tamei mace and tamei sheretz lo. What's the rule by Korban Pesach? If most of the tzibur is tamei sheretz, let's say there was a lot of dead reptiles and everybody touched them, they don't bring Korban Pesach on Pesach Rishon. They don't do Pesach only if they're tamei mace. That's what it says. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Ish Ki yet tamei lenefesh. He gets sprinkled. He gets the second. He gets postponed till Pesach Sheni. Ish nitcha vein tzibur nitcha. But it's only, it says ki yet tamei lenefesh. If he's tamei meis, he gets nitcha to Pesach Sheni, in individual, right? But the tzibur is not the nitcha Pesach Sheni. But what is they bring Pesach Rishon? It says Rashi is afka b'kohanim ratznami b'meis ishkri, only b'meis. It says mekaprin k'miskaprin ma miskaprin tamei meis. Just like the people who receive the kapara, we're talking about tamei meis. They're the ones who are nitcha, and tamei sheretz lo, right? Only the tamei meis is allowed, to bring on the tzibur. Ab machaprin tamei meis ain't tamei sheretz lo. The machaprin also is only tamei meis. Only if the coin's a tamei meis, he can do the kapara. Tamei sheretz not. And Rashi says, so take a look at Rashi. Machaprin k'miskaprin, a little bit above where we are now, about a third of the way down on the page in Rashi. Kshehutra tuma b'tzibur, shnei mayu b'mashma. Tuma b'tzibur, kohen b'tzibur, right? Kohen b'tzibur. Ta'mimodo nafklan, right? Hilkoch kohen k'tzibur. Ma kshehutra tuma eitzel rov tzibur. Just like when it was mutter b'tzibur, shenitmu tamei meis hutra v'lo tuma sheretz. Right? As I said, if most of the tzibur is tamei sheretz, you don't bring a carbon pesach rishon. Only if it's tamei meis. Af kshehutra l'kohen b'carbon tzibur. Betzibur meso to lo sheretz. After jehutu lekoin the carbon tzibur. Same thing. It's only meso to lo sheretz. All right, so that's what he says. That's how he goes against the kalpa miskam. Tamei meis ain't tamei sheretz lo. Back in the Gemara. Af machapran tamei meis ain't tamei sheretz lo. So the Gemara says, Mike Sabri, what did the Ziknei Darim hold? It's a strange shita. They're saying that even though the Mishnah says if a kohen's tummy can't do the avoda, but if he's tamei meis, since a tamei meis can bring a carbon tzibur, can bring a tamei tzibur. So bidi everybody can bring a carbon eviachar. Mike sabri ik ain't shochem zarka. Now I mentioned before that let's say a tamei sheretz and it's erev Pesach. Can you bring a carbon for him? Can you bring his carbon Pesach because he could eat it at night after he went to the mikveh? Right, erev Pesach, he goes to the mikveh and he can eat it at night. Well, a tamei meis. Let's say it's a tamei meis' seventh day. Right, tamei meis is going to be tamei for 7 days, but let's say his 7th day coincides with erev Pesach, so he goes to the mikveh. He could also eat at night, right? So he's like this. So that's the machshayla. Do you say ein shach mezorken al tamei sheretz? Do you do shchita and zerk? Let's say for a tamei sheretz who can eat at night, he can use carbon Pesach at night. Do you? So my law of the tzibur b'tzuma. Why do you say that the tzibur? Why do you assume that a tamei sheretz cannot be that? Kol shebiyachid nitcha. If the tamei sheretz is nitcha to Pesach Sheni, tzibur avdei b'tumah. That's the rule. Kol shebiyachid nitcha. Whatever. If a yachid is pushed aside, is postponed, the tzibur does b'tumah. So if you hold that a tamei sheretz on erev Pesach, he could mail in his carbon, meaning he could send the carbon in from outside the base of Mikdash. He sends it and they process it for him, his carbon Pesach, and he can eat it at night. So if you hold that, but then it's okay. But if you hold you cannot do that, so that means he's nitcha. Kol should be a nitcha, tzibur avdei b'tumah. So the tzibur also does a b'tumah. So why do you say that machaprin can miskaprin, just like miskaprin is tamei meis ain't tamei sheretz? So no, the miskaprin is also tamei sheretz. So the kal v'chomer would still hold. If you say that for a kohen who's tamei meis, he could do the avodah b'diavad, certainly tamei sheretz can. Elok savrei shochtim v'zorken al tamei sheretz. No, you do send it. In other words, you do shech a tamei sheretz on erev Pesach. You do accept his carbon because he ate it at night. Therefore, he's not nitcha. The rule is if he's nitcha, kol shebiyachid nitcha, like we say, ish ki tamei, if he's tamei, and you want to learn not just tamei lenefesh, but if you hold he's nitcha to Pesach Sheni, so that tzibur doesn't b'tumah. The answer is no. Only a tamei meis is nitcha as an individual to Pesach Sheni. But he holds ksav shochem v'zorken al tamei sheretz. A person who's tamei sheretz on erev Pesach, he's not nitcha. He can send in his carbon and eat it at night. So but that's the Ziknei Darim shita. Amar Ula. But the rabbis didn't like this shita because it, okay, maybe you couldn't knock it off from this kal v'chomer because he has an answer, and he'll say that the tamei sheretz can bring a carbon Pesach if he's tamei sheretz on erev Pesach because he can eat it at night. So he's not nitcha, and therefore the tzibur doesn't do it b'tumah. Okay, Amar Ula. In other words, if the whole tzibur is tamei, so what? Let them all send in their karbanos and do it at night. There's no reason you can do it beheter. Okay. That's what their shita is. But still, their shita is difficult. Amar Ula Takalu. Some of the gifts that it's Reish Galusa, not Rish Lakish, Lidromoy. These Ziknei Darim, I guess the Reish Galusa had, shouted at them. Who would you say is stronger, has more power? The power of the Machaper, the Kohen, who's doing the atonement on their behalf, or the power of the ones who are being atoned for? I would say the Koch Maskapin. Why? Rashi says, at the first of the wide lines. Take a look at Rashi. A yachid whose tummy sheretz can send his carbon in, can come in and show up them his organ tummy sheretz. Can't do the avoda. So what do you see? That the person who's getting the kapara, he could bring his carbon on Erev Pesach. He can mail it in. Whereas the Kohen who's tummy sheretz cannot do the avoda for him. So you see that the koach of the person who's being atoned is greater than the koach of the person who's doing the atonement for him. So he said, again, the person who's getting the kapara, who's the Tomei Sheretz, who has to bring his carbon, he can bring his carbon on Erev Pesach, but the Kohen, who's Tomei Sheretz, cannot do the avoda for him. Where the Baalam, the owner of the carbon, is Tomei Sheretz. They can send their carbon in. Kohen Shinit B'Sheretz, but the Kohen who's Tomei Sheretz, Ein Marasa, cannot do the avoda for him, cannot cause his carbon to be accepted. Malkum Shinitnu Baalam the mace, where if the Baalam is Tomei mace, She'ein Meshachim Carbon is saying they cannot send their carbon in. Right? We're saying they cannot send their carbon in. That why? He's got to leave it till Pesach Sheni. Kohen Shinit B'Mace and it didn't Shein Marasa, certainly should not be Marasa. So here's your Kal V'chomer. The answer is Ksavar Ziknei Darim, Tomei Mace Nami Mishal Kabaros. In other words, we have a Kal V'chomer against Ziknei Darim. What was the Kal V'chomer? Marach in a place where if the Baalam was Tomei, they could send their carbon in like a Tomei Sheretz on Erev Pesach, but the Kohen who's Nit Sheretz cannot do the voter for him. So a place should Nit Baalam Mace, where if the Baalam is Tomei Mace, where he cannot send his carbon in. Why? Why can't he send it in? Because he's Pesach Sheni. It says very clearly, if an individual is Tomei Mace, he does Pesach Sheni. He can't send his carbon in. He can't mail it in. He's got does Pesach Sheni. So where the Baalam cannot send it in, certainly Kohen Shinit Mace should not be Maratza. That's the Kal V'chomer they used against the Ziknei Darim. The answer is Ksavar Ziknei Darim. Listen to this. The Tomei Mace Nami Mishal Kabar also. Listen to this. A Tomei Mace on Erev Pesach could also mail his carbon in if it's his seventh day. It's his seventh day. He could also mail his carbon in. Ivuk says ish. What are you talking about? The pasuk says ish ki tamei nefesh b'chodesh hasheni. He does his carbon on the second one. He says that's the mitzvah. L'chadchili he's supposed to do Pesach Sheni, but if he mailed it in on Pesach Rishon, he could do that too. Only l'chadchili. But B'diavad Ziknei Darim says that he could do Pesach Sheni.
It's the seventh day.
Only the seventh day, but he can mail it on the seventh day. Right? Tell me the pasuk pshat. Even if it's the seventh day for everybody, you got to go to Pesach Sheni. He says no. He could also do it. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah he should do Pesach Sheni. But B'diavad he could do it. Ivuk said ish lefi ochlo. He can't eat it. He can't eat it. If he's right, he can't eat a roy lachila. Since he can only bring a carbon for some of his roy to eat, he's not roy to eat it now. Even if it's roy to mail it in, but he can't eat it now. That's also the mitzvah. Lo, you can't do it. It's ma'akav also. It's only for the people who are included, who are members of the carbon. You shouldn't do it, but the evidence okay. No, the Pasuk said twice. And tachosu should only shechted for somebody who's a money. The same thing. So how could you say you could eat it? But you could eat it. The answer is Ziknei Darim lo makshi. They don't hold it that hekish, right? So the Gemara says, even if they don't have it, I guess you could still ask this Kal V'chomer against them. The same Kal V'chomer, but with a slight knetch. Where the Baalam's Tom Sheretz, that they can mail their carbon in lechatchila, they can mail it in. Kohen Shin B'Sheretz Ein Maratza, he can't be Maratza for them, right? Because we said everybody holds that a Kohen Shin B'Sheretz is Tommy, that's the mission of the Mishnah. Tommy, a Kohen who's Tommy can't do the Avodah. Malkum Shin Baal B'Meis. Some mace, Sheim Shachim Kum B'Sein L'Chel, even the Zekni Armor Moda L'Chel, you got to go to Pesach Sheni, only Bidi Evan. So certainly Malkum Shin Baal B'Shem Shein, they can't do it L'Chel, like what? Like the Tommy Sheretz who could send it in L'Chel, Kohen Shin Meis Edin Shein Maratza, Shirli Maratza. So he had this Kavachomer against the Zekni Darum. The Chiddush is a tremendous Chiddush. Nobody seems, the other rabbis all apparently disagree with him. All right, tomorrow's Gemara, we'll pick it up actually from the top of the page, be on the podcast, and for the people in Chutz La'aretz, we'll put up Chaf Dalet also today, and we will, Amir Hashem, we will meet here again on Wednesday morning, right? Wednesday morning, where we'll pick it up from the third line on Daf Chaf Dalet. There's a 2 dots there at the top of Chaf Dalet B'Aleph. Chag Sameach L'Kulam. Don't rely on ChatGPT.
So Hekesh is not, you could not hold by a Hekesh.
Yeah, not hold by the Hekesh. Yeah. Once you have a Hekesh, hey, Meshivan ala Hekesh. But he could say they don't hold the Hekesh because it's not what is considered a Hekesh. It's 2 words which are close by each other, but you could. How did you darshan it? Same thing with like Gzeir Shava. It's if they learn the Gzeir Shava or not. In other words, don't say if you don't hold by the Gzeir Shava because that wasn't their Kabbalah.
Very good. Cuts a lot of time off.
That's right.
You just check it, but it's already.
That's right. But you have
It's done.
right. Trust but verify.
But in colleges, and you have people turn in their papers,
Yeah.
how the professor even know that.
They don't know. They don't know. It's true.